this is where the follicular cells, they proliferate and become granulosa cells. And there's actually going to be a zone. It's going to be surrounded by a zone called zona pellucidea, which is actually a glycoprotein layer. It's a glycoprotein layer. The zona pellucidea. It's a glycoprotein layer, and it's actually forming between the oocyte and the granulosa cell. This is showing us the stages of follicle maturation that happens in the cortex of the ovary. Remember, follicle maturation happens in the cortex of the ovary. So here we see primordial follicle at puberty. In response to hormonal stimulation, it begins to mature into the primary follicle. And it takes about 2 to 3 months for the primary follicle to reach the pre-antral stage. This is the pre-antral stage. It's just getting bigger circle. It becomes a bigger sac. In about the 70th day, the pre-antral follicle will have become an antral follicle, a mature antral follicle. And you can tell that this is a mature antral follicle because it has this right here, which is fluid. The antral follicle will grow and mature in about 15 days, right before ovulation. Then after ovulation, the remnants of the antral follicle becomes this thing right here, which is the corpus callosum. Okay. So fertilization happens, it's actually, we are fertilizing a ovulated secondary oocyte. So if this fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum will actually degenerate and become the corpus albicans, which is this. Okay. All right. So now, now we're going to talk about female internal accessory organs. Remember, accessory organs, we have internal and external. So first, let's talk about the internal, which includes the uterine tube, or called the fallopian tube, which has basically the few parts. The fallopian tube has a few parts. Okay, it has the isthmus, and it has the infundibulum, which is funnel shaped, and extensions from the infundibulum called the fimbriae. These fimbriae actually lie they are like hugging the ovaries, and they pick up an ovulated egg cell. The mucosa of the uterine tube is lined with cilia that help to transport the egg down the uterine tube. Remember this, that fertilization happens in the uterine tube. Fertilization takes place in the uterine tube. The uterus itself, it's actually a hollow muscular organ attached to the pelvic walls by the broad and round ligament. There are 3 regions of the uterus. 3 regions of the uterus. The first part is called the fundus. The second part is called the body. And then the last part, which is the narrowest, is the cervix. That's the lower end that extends into the vagina. These are the regions of the uterus. Then we have layers of the uterus. We have the endometrium, which is the mucosa layer, the innermost layer. Myometrium, this is the muscular layer, middle, and the perimetrium, which is serosa. Endometrium, this is where implantation of the fertilized egg happens. That becomes a fetus later on. Myometrium, this is the layer that contracts during childbirth in response to oxytocin stimulation. Vagina, this is a fibromuscular tube that runs between the uterus and the outside of the body. Okay. The vagina will convey uterine secretions. Okay. Remember, not urine. Okay. Because the urine is secreted out through the female urethra. Okay. Also provides a passageway for the offspring during childbirth. Vagina also has 3 layers. It has the inner mucosal layer, which is lined with stratified squamous epithelium, a middle muscle layer, and an outer fibrous layer. We have the female external genitalia, okay, which basically consists of the vulva, okay. That includes the labia majora, minora, clitoris, and the vestibular glands. Labia majora are basically rounded folds of adipose tissue and skin. Their function is to enclose and protect other external reproductive organs. The labia majora actually merge to form a rounded elevation over the pubis symphysis called the mons pubis, which is this right here. The labia minora, these are longitudinal flat folds located between the labia majora, and they are supplied with blood vessels. Why? Because the labia majora at its anterior end covers the clitoris, which is actually erectile tissue. The clitoris actually corresponds to the male columns of the erectile tissue, the corpus cavernosa and corpus spongiosum. That's what it basically corresponds with. This is the clitoris right here. The vestibule, this is the space between the labia minora that encloses the vaginal and urethral opening, which is this right here. We have vestibular glands that secrete mucus into the vestibule during sexual stimulation. Now, erection, lubrication, and orgasm. So erectile tissues in the clitoris and around the vaginal entrance, they will respond to sexual stimulation. Nitric oxide is the molecule that dilates arteries inside the erectile tissues, leading to expansion of the vagina. This is followed by lubrication, which is facilitated by the vestibular glands that secrete the mucus into the vestibule. That mucus actually lubricates the vestibule and vagina, which helps during intercourse. Orgasm, this is where the clitoris responds to sexual stimulation. And the sexual stimulation will basically end with orgasm, okay, which is a feeling of psychological and physiological pleasure. Here, the muscles of the perineum, uterus, and uterine tube actually contract rhythmically to help with sperm transportation towards the uterine tubes. And this is a summary of the processes and the steps.